Okay, so creepy music is creepy music. That's actually a track I have called Creep Show. I was going to try to put on the cowboy hat that comes in with YouTube Studio, but it just didn't look right. It's tilted down too much, and well, I have ears. That doesn't stop me from doing a Santa Claus hat, but that's beside the point. But tonight, it is more of great ghost stories from the Old West. And if we finish, I'm probably going to have to put up a poll either on Twitter or on Blue. Well, I don't think Blue Sky has polls yet. Anyway, I'll either put it there, maybe on the YouTube channel. Let's see what book to start next week, because I do have to get a picture of the book and everything else so I can get the screen loaded. But I'm thinking, I've got a book that says it's American folklore. It may also involve singing, because American stories and American heroes tend to have songs written about them. And I don't know if I'll try to get my bass out to play or not. I don't know yet. But if I do, I'll probably just do it using my microphone, so I'd have to try to figure out how to resync the input and everything else. Even though I have the equipment to do that, I just don't do the extra work. Oh. Really? The music's just now starting? But congrats on getting first, Darth. I think you're the only one here so far. Which, you know, is completely normal for my streams. And that's for someone lurking. If so, hi lurkers, how you doing? Glad you're here. Let's go ahead and... Oop, there's a Mantine in chat. Oh yeah, and I did do some searching, both between Twitch and Stream Elements. Stream Elements loyalty program is separate from Twitch's. I'm not sure if I'd sing it in Cheops's voice, but that depends on what the song is. This book is like an inch and a half thick, at least. And it does have, well, it's a treasury of American folklore, stories, ballads, and traditions of the people. So it would be an interesting read. Ooh, yep, there's a lot of jokes in here. Jokes, very short stories. I have no idea who Feeboldson is. And it's apparently Nebraska folklore, which would explain the name. Because for some reason Nebraska has a lot of people from Scandinavia, and that naming convention is perfectly normal for them. But anyway, to the forest. Oh, I never did fix the cat screen on here. Let's see. Let's bundle. That full size cat cam group. Okay. That should make the furry things a little bit more visible. I'm gonna switch it the other way a little bit too. Not that I want to hide the ghost behind it, but I tried to make the cat cam window the same size as the alerts bundle, so the alerts would just show up with the cats. See, you should be able to see the other ghosts going back behind the book. There it is. I see its eyes. Okay. So we made it over halfway through this book. Which is good because then I can just take it back to the person that gave it to me and say, okay, thank you for the book. But these ghost stories have been fairly interesting. Especially when they have that nice little twist ending in them. Which apparently is definitely something that American writers like to do. Off center again. Okay. Is the audio okay? OBS went through another update before I started, so I'm having to make sure everything didn't change. And it's really yummy. Buttery? Okay. Smooth like butter. Okay. Well, welcome in, Guilty. It's good morning? I don't know what time it is over there. When are you supposed to come back? Oh, it's 11 there? Okay, well. That means you get to hear ghost stories for lunch. And I was saying that I might do American folk tales, well, as the next book, instead of reading the Pistol Pete biography. Because, you know, I really do prefer stories to fact. Technically leaving on the 23rd, but you'll arrive on the 23rd, so yeah, that sounds about right. Unless you time it just right, and you get home after midnight. Then you would have left and gotten back the same day anyway. As opposed to leaving and getting back the day you left. No, wait, the day before you left. Time is a weird thing. It really is. Oh! We has a cat. That computer is really laggy. It would be kinky. But it wouldn't do anything to me. It's like, I was technically born a wolf. I had to learn to become human. So. Curses versus Fey magic. I'm not sure how well it work. Though from pictures I've seen on his Discord, I'm sure Guilty is good with some things with his tongue. And I'm glad I edit this stuff after I stream. Wait. What am I waiting on? Okay, well, yeah. Sometimes. I know, I will bite if I just get the urge. Or actually hunting, then, I have to do a kill bite, but that's beside the point. It's not catching my mouth open as much. That would probably make you more dangerous. Well, see, that's one of the things about the lore that kind of throws me about werewolves. Because nothing in any of the folklore I see changes mass. It will elongate the body, but as far as somehow it strengthens I think the Benedatu, well, the Benedati, they are kind of more like me. They just change form and stay the same, essentially. Other werewolves, like the Beast of Gravon, it wasn't so much werewolf as it is just more like my dad, an enlarged wolf. The Irish werewolves and the Scottish werewolves are just like regular dudes that happen to have a wolf's head and a tail. So, yeah. But they don't, well, the Irish ones changed because Ireland didn't have the werewolves. Scotland had the werewolves. And there's a lake in Scotland that the family was supposedly buried at, which may or may not be another reason why I want to go to Scotland. Other than, doing research and possibly interacting with a fae, which may not be a great thing, but still. But oddly enough, only in mainland Europe were werewolves considered vicious creatures. In Scandinavia, they were helpful. In Scotland, they were helpful. In Ireland, they were helpful. Uh-huh. If you're going by that logic, you have to remember, if anything happens to you, he would lose it too. Because that's the curse bite. But most of the time, if you ever look at the folklore, there's only the one werewolf at a time, because they bite and end up dying themselves and transfer the curse onto the next person. As opposed to the Roman ones, you're only really cursed for 7 years, provided you behave. I have done way too much research in this. It's folklore. Of course I'm going to know it. If I'd known I could actually get a degree in folklore, I probably would have gone for it instead of radio, TV, film. Well, maybe not film. In fact, the werewolf movie I was supposed to have been involved in, oddly enough, as a streamer, around a fire telling ghost stories. Uh, the werewolf lore in that was they were just normal people and they would change into large wolves. So they were more along the Benedetti style. But anyway, yeah, I'm kind of that way. I was really good at customer service as long as I could get drunk afterwards. Now I just don't like talking to people in person at all. I actually had a call with a psychiatrist about things this morning, and I broke down 2 or 3 times during the conversation, and it was only half an hour. But hopefully it showed him enough of a mental case to actually get more. But anyway, ghost stories. Yes, ghost stories. Like that thing wandering around over there. Well, not that badly drawn. And of course, the first one actually has to do with the moon. Because our first ghost story for the night, Back Before the Moon, by S. Omar Barker. On a little meadow slope in the hidden valley that lies behind the black woods of the upper Vallecito stands a great cross built of red stone. This is in the Rio Arriba County of New Mexico, where all the world is still outside, and where there are said to be strange sights every night of a moon for those with eyes to see them. Here, then, is how a redstone cross came to be. If you had seen it, you would want to know. An old arboreal baldonado, a graybeard, squatting in the sun beside his adobe and cañoncito, would tell you, as he told me. Elgio Jaramillo Spanish names. Elio Jaramillo came riding down out of the black woods from the Valle Escondido, and all the little cañons ran belly deep in snow water to stop him. The river itself, modest and clear-eyed in summer, now boomed through its redstone box like the wrath of Mia Tia Dios, and then swung violently into the three-cornered cove where Elgio would have to cross it. Without warning, a great pine came swooping down across his path. His pony reared and swung around in the futile struggle back up the hill. Elio's eyes widened in sudden alarm. Then the deeper fear that drove him down the sweeping slopes of the mountain returned to his eyes. He jerked his caballito back down the hill, spurred him flounder around the fallen trees and on again, down the slippery trail to the river, which snaked deep down the steep canyon, coils 10 deep and 50 feet from the edge to edge. He could not hope to cross the river, yet he would have to. Back in the squat cabin with a flat dirt roof on a long grass slopes tipped in the sun, lone homesteader of the hidden valley, Ursulinda, lay in a fever. Ursulinda, his little brown-eyed angel, whose tears could half break his heart and bring his rough face down against her cheek. Ursulinda, at 8 years already, the image of La Masidra Cuerda, the dear little lost mother who had left them to be with her Tata Dios. Elio had left her, dying perhaps, with 2 brothers. They were good brown mountain lads who knew what the sheep were saying when they cried out at night, and who did not mind talking to the mountains alone in the moonlight, but who would run and hide when a stranger would appear in the valle. The two boys were with her. One, Toribio, would be down on his knees asking God to leave her with them. The other, Juanito, would be holding fast to her hand. Leo battled down through the black woods to the Vasitos, with the whip of fear lashing him from behind, and one tiny hope to lead him. One little Cruz de Jesus, a wooden crucifix on the altar in the church of the village, the cross that had cured Marqueo Romero from the fever, said Jose Adan at the time of a doomed spring in Valle Alamoso. If only Padre Onesimo would give him that crucifix. If only he could fight his way back to Ursulinda before the red moon turned white over the tops of the firs and the coyotes came out talking their queer way on the hilltops. There was a doctor in the village, too. Old Partrenu, with his black bag and half-white whiskers. Elio would see him for medicine, but after all, what could one hope from a mere medicio in such a case? 3 days ago, Toribio had come crying to the cabin, and sure enough, when Elio went out with him, there was old Chongo, the biggest goat on a stump inside the corral, standing upright like a man and preaching to his flock. They could hear strange words beyond understanding when the Sachango saw them, then coming in there with a sudden red fire circle around him. As it died away, the old goat leaped down from the herd and sang, "Bah!" in his own language again. A puff of heat came blowing past their ears that could only have been the breath of the very devil. That night, Juanito saw a great wolf go flying out of the trees the way a lost soul would fly. When the goat appeared against the white moon, there was a blue fire in his mouth, and he dropped down suddenly and stood howling on a rock at the top of the hill. When that night was halfway into dawn, the coyotes, slim wolf brothers of El Dominio, the demons, sat on the hill and began mad fandango to drive back the sun. Over across the valley, one answered the call from another world. Elio knew the voice, and it said, "Earthlinda, Earthlinda," over and over again. He lay in bed listening. He heard his little daughter moan softly in her sleep, but when he muttered a swift Ave Maria, she was silent again, and outside the two coyotes went yip yipping back to the woods. That morning, Ursulinda rose a little quieter, yet well and clear-eyed, but another mother goat was dead on her knees in the corral. When the boys had milked the others and Ursulinda drank the milk, moon whiteness came over her face, and the fever began to take her again. Juanito looked in her cup, and sure enough, there, for a second, was the outline of a face marked in blue pinpoint bubbles of the milk. It was the devil's spring and the devil's fever that had come to Valle Escondido. Elio Jaramillo rode out of the Black Hills for a token of our Savior that would save his daughter, if not from death, at least from El Diablo, who would take her very soul away. The river was a monster across his path. It switched down in a canyon in a swift current so that every wave arched its back and leaped to keep its fellows like the wolf anxious to be in at the killing. Although the muddy river knew it would be death, he urged the black horse to the river's edge. Black Choto groaned, but stepped into the torrent, for he knew his master. 2 steps brought his head into the waves. The horse drew death when he saw it, and he saw it then, but it was not close to that huge and desperate pawing of water that did not bring him streaming and quaking back to the bank. Elio's heart was a second without beating, for he knew that Choto could not carry him across. Yet he must cross. 20 steps above, where the water came tearing out of the box canyon, it was narrower. At the edge of the bank, the curled fingers of the flood clutched at the roots of a tall blue pine. If he had an axe, he could chop it, and it might swish down and catch on the other bank, for the tree was long enough. But Elio had left the valle in half a stupor and dread for his soul, and had not been foreminded. He tried pushing the tree. It swayed a little, for the water had loosened its roots, but it did not fall. A dozen little stones and a single block of black earth, where he disturbed the anchor of the tree, tumbled into the stream, but no more. The black horse stood like a slim statue back a bit from the bank, and Elio looked at him without hope. Then suddenly he was at the saddle, unbuckling the lasso that always hung there. It was a long rope, light and tough, the way the cowboys like. Elio could throw it too, and with a swish that would fetch up whatever he caught in a quick surprise. Now, it was no running horse he must rope, but the snag roots of a big log lying in clusters of dead snakes across the rio. He threw it with all his might, and the slim string of the rope flew clear across the water. But it did not catch, but it was long enough. It dropped into the water and dragged down the stream, but Elio pulled at it swiftly, and a spark of hope came into his heart. Now he could cross the river. It remained for him to throw the rope swiftly and surely. And he did. The third time the questing loop caught a stout snag and held when the middle bellowed like a strong tug of the raging water. He tied Black Choto to a bush back in the bank to await the return for La Cruz Salvadora before the moon would rise. Then he crept into the water, knotting his hands in the rope and fighting that giant 1,000 times his strength with the muscles of a man and the heart of a leon. Elio had come down out of the black woods where Lobo Diablo, a devil wolf, had flown across the moon, and he was going down to the Velocitos for a cross of Jesus to save the child that was his other heart, and he had crossed the river because... On a steep bank in safety, he heard the soft sound of a woo behind him. He looked back, half in terror. It was the Blawpoo pine that was swaying down over the river. It came softly to rest its upper branches on a gray boulder across the river, so that its trunk and its stout bristled bridge over the water that a man might cross, if only Elio had waited. But now he was over. With coiled rope around his dripping shoulders, he was on his way down the wild curved road. Now he would run in the mud for a few miles distance to the chapel, as he would be back across the pine tree bridge before the moon. Jesus adorado. Elio ran like the cursing old river itself, but here there had been more sun on the road. But as he went, dodging the black bog holes and talking a prayer to the God Jesus, there was a voice that muttered in little canyons and a soft sound of doom in the wind, and the black hills talked behind it. It was where the slanting road comes down to the river, and a helpless old trail crawls to the west edge of the water, that his tired legs pulled him down to rest. And it was when he dropped his head in his leathered hands for a dead still moment that he heard the voice that called from over the river, the voice that had called across the water. Amigo! Amigo! It was a strange sound. Elio looked in wonder. Who could be calling from the old trail? What would the poor sheepman see? Leaning against the white trunk of a fallen tree, holding himself up with his arms out on two branches, as though he might be Christ on the cross, was a long-haired man with a curly brown beard on his face, and black woods behind him. Elio had not yet closed his mouth from surprise when the man stepped down to the brink of the rapid water, called again. Amigo, help me across the water. I cannot pass it alone. Elio saw that there was a stain of red, like blood, on his blue rag jacket, and remembered how he had heard the old hermit, digger of the mines, who was like standing on his head half the day because of the crazy he was. So Elio called to him that he could not cross that torrent, worse here than above, for it was only a crazy miner, and Elio must be running down the road to the village. Your rope! Throw me your rope! The old man called out, now more intensely. But Elio was going again, and would leave there, but who would stop to help the old fool drown? He looked back over his shoulder, for his heart stopped for a second with his legs. The old man was wading in, arms over his head. He would be lost. Let him drown. Elio had battled to come down this far to the Cruz de Jesus, and he must go on. But in his heart now he felt that it was only one world, and one man in it, the crazy old man waiting out to go down in the flood, and only Elio could save him. The hawk did not flick his wing more quickly than Elio pulled his rope coils from his shoulder, and ran back, and whistled a strong magnancy across the water. leaped blind over the old man. When he was strangling down in the flood, Elhio caught the rope and turned around a stout white aspen and pulled him up again. It was one hombrecito against the whole weight of another, and the long muscled water besides, and there was death in it for both one or both if Elhio should slip, for he had the rope around his hand, an arm like a snake. Elhio pulled and hauled and cursed like a madman, but old Minero gurgled and fought the water, then went dead on the rope until a whirl caught and swung him past the middle. Elhio pulled him on the bank like a dead trout, but the old man was not dead. There were 2 long lost hours the sheepman was working with him until he stood again. Now he would be too late to get back to Ezrina. He tried to run on now, but the Minero picked him up by the sleeve and said, "Where you go, my friend? And why do I see shadows in the black woods in your eyes?" Elio wanted to hurry away, but now he must stay and tell the old man what he asked, for there was no end to the look in his eyes. He did tell him, even how Shango had preached to the flock of the valley, and how he had come fighting across the river. The Minero gave him a look, like the look of a clear blue sky, and said, "Who shall say that the little roots are only growing for wild grass, or that the uphill is not down to the one who understands?" Even before he had finished, Elhio was off again, down the rough road to the village. Late, but with half of fear shadow gone from his black eyes, and not knowing why. At the beginning of the evening, Elhio came over the last hill with the gray sage clumps about him, and looked up upon the village down by the river where he could find the chapel and the holy crucifix. A blackness rushed back into his heart when he looked, for the long digging arms of the water had crept out and clutched the old chapel, and the sun-baked mud in its walls was crumbling into the flood. As he ran crying down the hill, the last front wall of the great cross upon it tumbled into the water, and all God-fearing people of the Valecitos stood groaning and watching it. All but the good Padre Onesimo, for his body was already somewhere down the river, and his soul flying up to the Tata Dios. Elio Jaramillo had come down out of the black woods by talking wolves for the Cruz de Jesus to save his daughter, but the black water was there before him. Even the good Padre, who might have known the holy words to say the making matter cross, was gone. Padre, who might have known the holy words to say for making another cross, was gone. Elhio took back a useless medicine of the old patricio, Panturo, yet he was now without hope. How could a little red bottle, white pills, save a girl when there was a blue fire in the mouth of a flying wolf across the moon? Now he must go back through the black woods to bury his dead, and his heart with her under the black earth. He had lost 2 hours fighting the river for the crazy digger of mines, and the avenging water had been that long before him at the chapel. There was only one word in the woods as he climbed back toward the valle, and that was the shouting of the word of the river in the canyon. Elhio crossed the pine tree bridge that had fallen for him. The water was singing a wild song beneath him. Now he would step down to die in it, but he must not, for the dead must be buried. Black Choto was there by the foot of the hill with a strange, joyful voice welcoming his master, who had no ears for the sound of a poor horse's gladness. It was slow up the mountain. The moon was white and going west over the black firs when Elhio topped the hill where the little coyotes should be out talking their queer way in the night. But there was no voice in the woods. "Hey, Salty. Welcome in. Thank you for the raid." Did it say Salty raid? Let's see, what were we up to? Underrail? Persona's here? What? Who? Where? Ah, okay. Ah, okay. Well, close enough. So, good to know it's a good game. May have to look into it. Yep, brains do fart. It's allowed. We are in a story where a guy is. Well, he was racing the moon to get across and go back to his daughter to heal her. The moon has already gone from red to white, so he thinks he's failed. We don't know yet. So he could have probably gotten back, except he actually stopped to do a good deed. So, how ghost stories go. Though, I have to admit, a wolf with a mouthful of blue fire flying across the moon. I kind of like that visual. If you need to do any extra stream care, feel free. Feel free to lurk. That's what good stories are for. And bad stories are for when I sing. And welcome in, everyone. Ah, cool. Thank you for the donation. They will probably appreciate it. Especially since they're going to be taking care of the zoo now, too. In case of the city owns the zoo, but Wild West Wildlife is going to be taking care of it. I mean, some of the animals they rehabbed that they couldn't release to the wild end up there anyway, so it just makes sense. Enjoy the lurk. Thank you for the donation. It was slow going up the mountain. The moon was white and going west over the black firs when Elio topped the hill where the little coyotes should be out talking their queer way in the night. But there was no voice in the woods. The poor sheepman understood the silence of death in the valley. For why should a devil wolf be howling now that Elio was coming back with empty hands? Too late. When he rode in the valley with the black cabin up on the sunny ridge of it, there was a cry from the marsh by the road, and when Elio looked, it was the old El Minero again, deep in a bank of the melting snow, spring and calling, "Amigo, friend, throw me your rope, throw me your rope!" Elio would kill him now, for his heart was black with grief. Yet he did not. Again it was in his heart that there was but one world and one man in it, and that was the old man dying there in the moonlight snow. He looped him again with a rope he threw the same sure way, and pulled him out flat where the snow was hard. But he did not raise him up, for now he must ride up a hill to kiss the dead lips of his Erzlinda. Ay, Jesus. But it was the boy Torbillo that ran out when Elio came to the cabin. But it was Erzlinda. It was the boy Toribio who ran out when Elio came to the cabin. Okay. No, that's right. But it was Elislinda, the little brown sister of the angels, who stood in the light of the open door and called to him, her voice singing into his poor heart like the joy of a day that never was. How could a man listen to his boy telling him something until Ursulinda was in his arms and her face against his? For they must now tell the strange miner man with the beard, and with the look of the blue sky in his eyes and the red stains of blood on his jacket, had come wordlessly into the cabin with queer grasses on his brow. And when Ursulinda drank the red drink the stranger brought from her from beneath his jacket, her fever left her, and they, falling on their knees at her bed, did not see him leave. It was a quiet moonlight that Ergio Jaramillo went quickly searching down the valley for a mineral he had left dying in the snow. But the only thing he found was a print where his clothes had stained the snow like a blood-red cross. Here's the holy calm that follows springtime, where Ergio Jaramillo has built the red stone cross in the Valle Escondido in honor of the holy Jesus, and the little coyotes talk their queer, quiet way at night. Okay. So because he stopped and helped the man twice, his daughter was healed. And what does that tell us, kids? That a wolf with blue fire flying across the moon is pretty badass, even if he's supposed to be a devil dog. But even when you're in urgent rush, you should stop and help people. Yeah. I am bad at morals. Let me see how long this next story is, because it's 47, well, almost 48 minutes. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to pause the ads again. Hexer. It's 14 pages. I may have to pause it, well, pause the story near the end, just for ad break. But anyway, our next ghost story for the night, The Hexer by Thomas Thompson. No one introduced me to John Brock, the man who came to get this team the night we moved to the new farm Dad had bought out there at the edge of the swamp. But then, you really don't need to be introduced. It was the first time I'd ever seen a hunchback, but that wasn't what you noticed first. He had eyebrows as thick as horses' tails, and when he chewed tobacco, which he always was, his eyebrows bounced up and down, and his coal black eyes sort of glittered through them, snapping on and off like the way stars do through the trees on a windy night. I knew right off he was different as new as this land we'd come to, and that land was sure different from the Texas panhandle we were used to. My dad always had been fiddle-footed, and we were used to moving, because he'd work for one cow outfit and then another, but this time he really pulled up stakes. He had been working for Mr. Charles Goodnight out there in the Paladero. Okay, this story starts in my region. Kind of cool. He had been working for Mr. Charles Goodnight there in the Paladero, and he had just come back from the trail driving a herd up to Dodge. I knew the minute I looked at him he had something big on his mind because he was grinning ear from ear. But I don't guess any of us was ready for it when he said, "It's California, Mother. That's where we're headed." Far into the night, Mother and Father sat there in the kitchen, the lamp throwing a big circle of light on the maps and railroad folders Dad had brought back from Dodge. The big California gold rush was long past, but according to those railroad folders, the real gold was still there in the ground. All you had to do was get to it and plow, put in seeds, and sit back and watch them grow. A place called the San Joaquin Valley. Wheat and barley grew as high as a man on horseback, and there was always work for a good cowhand, which my dad was, because there were cattle on 1,000 hills. My mother hinted we could just go up to Kansas and get some railroad land, but Dad said, "And face the grasshoppers and blizzards and cattlemen tearing down our fences? No, siree, Bob. It's California for us." Hey, Matsu. Welcome in. You missed the first story, which, had the really cool image of a wolf with a mouthful of fire flying across the moon. And a ram preaching to sheep. Yeah. This is evil story stuff. Now we're doing the Hexer, which apparently starts out in my region. Oh, fun stuff. But feel free, settle back. Let us all welcome Matsu to the chat. You ejaculated. Well, okay. And that's the way it was. The land he took was in a swamp country along the Kiowa River in the San Joaquin Valley, California. As for John Brock, well, he just seemed to come along with the place. John Brock was a Missouri man. He had fought in the war between the states and had been mixed up in the Kansas-Missouri border troubles. Some said he had gotten out of a run out there and couldn't go back. I don't know. I knew for sure that when he was here in California, as the same as us, folks called him a swamp rat. He did odd jobs, and that's about all we knew. But we were going to find out a whole lot more than that. He was a man who could do almost anything. He could witch wells and make medicine out of green grapefruit and manzanilla leaves. He was always digging strange roots and drying different kinds of bark, and nobody knew just what he did with those things. And I was afraid to ask. John was the only one who had ever really seen the ghost mare that lived out there in the swamp. Dad said it was just an old stray mare, but my brother Hamp and I weren't so sure. John told us how he had seen her that night, fire squirting out of her nostrils, chains rattling in the dark. Dad said the Hutton boys had caught this old stray and tied a chain to her tail and turned her loose just as John was coming through the swamp one night. Some people believed that, but some didn't, and I was one of those who didn't. There was a ghost mare out there, all right. There were lots of strange things in the swamp you couldn't see, but you knew they were there. It was a wonderful place to live. Mom and Dad had a tent house with a wooden floor. Hamp and I had a tent in our own, right under a big weeping willow tree. Cliff Price, who was a cousin of Dad's and just a little older than my brother, came to live with us, and bit by bit we got the ground cleared with the stumps pulled and the farm started taking shape. The days were busy with the burning brush and cutting bean poles, and finally the ground was ready to plant potatoes. Those were the good times because John Brock came to help us, and that's when I started hearing all the stories he told. About how it had brained frogs in Missouri, about the hoop snake that put its tail in its mouth and rolled along. It had a stinger so poisonous it would kill a tree right in front of your eyes. One time John had tried to straddle one of the team, and the hoop snake got its stinger caught in the wagon tongue. That wagon tongue swelled up and pushed the team right off the road. There were other stories too, as we sat in the main tent house cutting potatoes to the eye, getting the gunny sacks cut just right so it fit over your shoulders so you could drop the potatoes, eye side up, into the furrow. We were just about ready to plant, but John Brock went out and looked at the moon. When he came back inside, he shook his head. "Can't plant tomorrow," he said. "Moon ain't right. Taters sure'll rot." Did what he said, because there was no doubt of it. John had a lot of magic powers. Cliff Price was the only one who didn't believe it. Cliff laughed at everything John said, and that's what finally got him in big trouble. It happened right after I got into a little bit of trouble myself. Dad sent me out to plant cantaloupes, and it was a hot day, and I'd just walk along, dig with a hoe, and drop in 8 seeds and cover the hole and tamp it. Take 8 long steps and do it again. Over about 3 rows, I got tired. I didn't know whatever made me do it, but I just dug one deep hole and put in all the seeds and left it to be covered up. As soon as I was done, I wish I had, because I knew those seeds would come up all in one spot and then Dad would know what I had done, and I'd be in real trouble. Well, that's when I went to John Brock, because I didn't know where else to go to. I was... What I had in mind was for John to hex those seeds so they wouldn't grow. Oh, he could hex, all right, but he didn't much like to talk about it. The way he explained it, the more you talk about hexing, the more your hexing loses its power. I remember how he sat there, chewing away at his cotton bowl twist, his eyebrows bouncing and his eyes glittering, and he finally said, well, I could hex the seeds, but it wouldn't get rid of what you done wrong, would it? I had to admit that he was right, but I sure wanted out of the mess bad, so he finally said, all right, well, that night, I'll take care of it. It was spooky out there in the cantaloupe patch, what with the frogs chunking and the mosquitoes buzzing. Every time one bit me, I got to worrying I'd get malaria. Sure, and take calomel and have to even take salivate. John told me about the salivate, and it was awful. If you took calomel and then ate anything sour or sweet, your teeth would fall out and your bones would get all soft. What you had to do was take some Epsom salts to get rid of the calomel. And I guess there wasn't anything that tastes worse. Well, with the ghost mayor out there roaming around and me worried about salivating, and John digging away at the ground just like he was digging a grave, well, I don't want to go through that night again. Finally, John had 3 buckets full of dirt. He packed 2 and I packed 1, and we went back to the tent where we could have some light. Of course, we had to tell Cliff and Hamp what I'd done, but they promised they wouldn't tell. John made a sifter out of the old window screen and sat up most of the night stirring out and sifting the seeds. I was too tired. I would have gone to sleep, but I couldn't because that was the night John told us about most of the hexing. Hamp and I sat there bug-eyed, and Cliff kept laughing, and John's voice kept droning on and on. Once I went outside, you could see the shadows climbing up the walls of the tent. An old pool fog was swirling around my ankles, and the sour smell of fresh-cut cottonwood was in the air, mingling with the sweet fragrance of the damp swamp grass and alkali. Swamp sounds were everywhere. It wasn't hard to believe John could hex people. Hamp and Cliff helped me get the cantaloupe seeds planted, and all the while we kept talking about the hexing. Then all of a sudden Cliff said, let's try it out. Hamp said he didn't know if we should or not, but Cliff said he would prove there was nothing to it. We could hex him. I sure didn't want any part of it, but they were older than I was after all, and they had promised to keep still about me burying all the seeds in one spot. They made me cross my heart and hope to die, and I went into the swamp with them. Usually, the swamp isn't too scary in daylight, but that day it was. The wild grapevines were always swung or hanging down like a jungle snakes across our path. The deeper we got into the swamp, the more gnarled and twisted the trees became. Every sound was sharp and clear, like a pistol shot. And I kept thinking about the ghost mayor, and at every step I expected to see old Fupa and step out in front of us. Fupa was supposed to have a tail like a monkey, though nobody had ever really seen it. He lived out here alone, and even the grown-ups were afraid of him. But because he always carried a shotgun with rock salt, and he would just as soon give you both barrels to look at you. I am sure you did, Darth. Hamp gave Cliff a chance to back out, but Cliff just laughed. He sure didn't want to show John broke up, and said, and he swore he was the Sutton boys the night they tied the chain around the old mare's tail. But Cliff just didn't believe anything, even went so far as to pick out the tree himself. It was big, slick bark adler, growing out of a little hummock in the ground. It was tall and straight with the bottom limbs coming out about 6 feet off the ground. Alders have a damp smell of their own, and this air was full of it. The smooth bark was just inviting someone to carve his name. Hamp said, you sure? And Cliff said, if you don't start carving, I'll do it myself. I'm sick and tired of listening to John Brock's wild tales. My brother took out his pocket knife. Now that we had actually started, hexing seemed almost too simple to be true. what you do is carve a picture of the one you want hexed on the bark of a tree. It doesn't really matter how to look like him, just so you name it who it is. And that picture Hemp carved sure did look a lot like Cliff. The main thing is, you name it. And when you take a 10-penny nail and put it right between the picture's eyes, every day you go out to the tree and say, Shuli, shuli, shuli papa que, shuli papa zigzag, tilly come a rule. Bury down hard on that rule, and when you do, just as you hit the nail just once, and when the nail is all the way in, the one you're hexing is dead. Okay, I'm gonna have to pause for the ads real quick, so break time. We'll finish figuring out how to do swamp hex. Not that I should let everyone have that knowledge, but still. It's cutting off. Oh, there we go. Anyway, just to make sure no one knows the instructions of how to hex someone, and I had to make sure my closed captions were on. Draw a picture in a tree bark and make sure it has the name. Then you take a 10-penny nail. You put it right between the picture's eyes. And every day you go out to the tree and say, Shule, 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 papa ke, shule, pop, a zigzag, tile, kamaru. Because she's a sneaky fox. The more Hamp carved, the less funny it seemed. And I guess Hamp felt that way too, because he wanted to stop, but Cliff wouldn't hear it. Finally he got mad and took the knife away from Hamp and finished the picture himself. It made Hamp start the nail and say the magic words, because, of course, you can't hex yourself. Cliff was laughing so hard as he doubled over. I sure want to see the old windbag's face when I bring him out here and show him this, he said. He was still laughing when he headed back home, but my brother was very quiet. I felt like a dozen spiders were crawling up my backbone. Cliff and Hamp said they'd kill me if I told John what they were up to, and I guess they would have, so I didn't tell. A couple of times I went with them, and a couple of times I didn't, but every day they went back to the big, slick bark rattler in the middle of the swamp and said the magic words of Shule, 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 Papake, and hit that nail for another proper whomp with a big rock. And on the fifth day, Cliff started to get sick. I looked at my brother and he looked at me, and we both knew that the other one was sinking. We had to get out of there quick and pull out that nail and stop the hex. I'd never put in such a day in my life. We had Cliff's chores to do as well as our own, and it was one of those days when Dad found a million extra things for us to do. We went in to supper, and there was Cliff, his face all red, not talking, and we couldn't talk to him because Mom and Dad were right there. Mom had made some soup, and Cliff wouldn't even swallow it, he was that sick. It was almost dark when we finally got away. We ran all the way out to the big altar, and when we got there, we were both out of breath, so our bellies hurt. My hands were shaking so bad I could hardly hold a rock. That old adder suddenly looked like its limbs were reaching down for us, and it kept getting darker, and the ground started fogging and seeping up our legs of our overalls. Hamp started working on that nail, pounding it in first one way and then another, trying to loosen it. But the green wood had swelled up around it, and it wouldn't move. It seemed to me that all he was doing was driving it in deeper. He gave it another try, but the nail bent over, flat against the bark of the tree. It was then I heard chains rattling, and I started to run. When I looked back, Hamp was right behind me. When we got to the main house tent, we were all out of breath. Mom said, "What have you been doing?" And Hamp said, "Playing." She told us we shouldn't play so hard, but we were hardly heard her because we wanted to see Cliff. But when we looked at him, I was sorry we had. He was burning up with fever. His eyes were all glazed and funny looking. He just kept staring at us as if he had never seen us before. We got out of there quick, and we sure didn't have an easy time of it going to sleep. I dozed off, and about midnight Hamp shook me and woke me up. He had a lantern and a hammer claw. "Get your clothes on," he said. "We're going back out there." "I'm scared," I said. "So am I," he said, "but you're going anyway." That was a night I wouldn't forget. We didn't light the lantern for fear somebody would see us. The tulle fog was wispy and reaching out at us with long, wet fingers, and every piece of brush grabbed us as it went by. We lost the trail, and finally Hamp had to light the lantern. Then it was worse than ever, because the shadows of our legs reached out in the darkness as if they were searching for trouble, and I knew who they were. When we got to the altar, it was even worse. Harp had me hold the lantern up so he could see. It threw a light on Cliff's picture that made it look more like a skull than a face. The sap had started to run and trickling down the face like black blood. The frogs were making an awful racket. Hemp started working on the nail, but his hands were shaking so badly he wasn't getting much of anywhere. Then all of a sudden the frog stopped, and it was dead silent. And then that quiet, weird footsteps. I dropped the lantern and grabbed onto Hamp, and he grabbed onto the tree, and then a low voice and flowing growl said, "What are you kids doing out here?" I knew it was Farquhar, and I expected to hear a blast of his shotgun and feel the sting of rock salt. Then John Brock stepped into the circle of the lantern light. I don't ever think I heard my brother talk so fast before, and I never will again. He told John everything. For a long time, John just stood there, holding the lantern up to Cliff's picture, chewing away and his eyes glittering through his eyebrows. Then he said, "You boys got a peck of trouble, yeah? But maybe I can straighten it out." He struck his face right close to mine. "You two keep your mouth shut about this, you hear? You sure didn't have to tell us twice." He picked up the hammer and walked over to the tree and took a long, hard look at Cliff with the sap blood running down his face. Without looking at us, he said, "Doctor was out here to see Cliff tonight." I was about the best news I had heard ever when my words came out as a big whoosh of breath. "What'd he say?" John turned on me as if I'd slapped him in the face. "What do you expect?" he said. "Doctors don't know nothing. Even if they did, you figure one could fix a hex like this? Now you two skedaddle at home before you're missed. Me, I got some consorting and haunts and witches to do. Might even have to get a couple of hairs from the ghost mare's tail. And don't you say a word to nobody that you're gonna do everything I'm fixing to do." We got right out of there fast. I felt as if somebody was breathing down my neck. I kept walking faster and faster, and finally I was in a full run. The tent sure did look good. I jumped under the covers with all my clothes on, and Hamp did the same. When we went up to breakfast the next morning, there was old Cliff sitting up, trying to eat some fried eggs, but he was having a hard time of it. His face was all swollen up, and he was really wobbly, but there wasn't any doubt he was better. My dad came in and took a look at him and said, "Boy, you got as fine a case of mumps as I've ever seen. Both sides." The first minute we could, Hemp and I got John Brock aside and said, "Dad says Cliff has mumps," I said. John just glowered at me. "Of course he has," he said. "I tried to change the hex into measles, but when you bent the nails, you sort of gouged out into its jowls." There wasn't any doubt about that. Cliff's jowls sure were swollen up. John had stayed up all night breaking the hex, he said. He showed us a couple of the white hairs from the tail of the ghost mare, and we put them in the horse trough where John said in time they'd turn into snakes. And sure enough, they did. That night he came out of the tent with a jar full of that green grapefruit manzanilla leaf brew of his. Boiled it down until it was thick as syrup. It was bitter as gall, but Hamp and I gulped it down without a word. Even then, he said, he wasn't sure if he should keep us from getting mumps, because of the part we'd had in the hex. And as it worked out, he was right. Hamp and I both got the mumps, but only on one side, so that wasn't so bad. Cliff never did laugh again at John Brock, and he even admitted he had been lying about being the Sutton boys when they tied a chain to that stray mare. I guess the old ghost mare is still out there. I don't know. The swamp has lots of secrets and never gives up. But I think the best kept secret is still the one about the time we almost hexed poor Cliff. Hey, I hope no one goes back and clips me repeating the hex and instructions, because I would not want to be held responsible for giving that kind of information out. Anyway. Our next ghost story for tonight. Johnny Who Rode the Ghost Train by Roby and Todd Hunter Ballard. Mirage, of course, as defined by the dictionary, is an optical phenomenon produced by a stratium of hot air and the varying density across which the observer sees reflections of some distant object. In southern Arizona, between the Little Dragoon Mountains on the north, a brown, bare spire of rock lying like a skeleton of a dinosaur, and its rugged peaks of the Dragoons proper on the south, where Cochise made his stronghold, there stretches a dry lake, barren of growth, flat, white, forbidding, and dead. Nothing lives there, nothing moves there, yet periodically a train, smoke boiling from its bell stack, was seen across the bleak expanse. Those who had seen it claimed they could hear the busy chuff of the engine and the clatter of wheel flanges on iron rails. The train appeared to be crossing a glittering blue lake, as if the glowing sand recalled an ancient memory of a time when the vast emptiness was a living seabed. But the nearest right-of-way ran on the far side of the distant mountains. No one in his right mind ever thought to ride this ghost train. Certainly not Johnny Cowden. Johnny was a young man with a single purpose: prospecting. He had a quick wit, a solid intelligence, and a ready grin. Together they made him a favorite of scattered ranch houses and isolated mines of the boom towns of the Southwest. But for all his gregariousness, Johnny was a loner in his trade. Despite his youth, he had already covered most of Arizona and New Mexico's mining districts. He was driven by restlessness, and the fact that he had not yet made a strike to net him more than $100. He was a true prospector. He had utter faith that just over the rocky ridge lay his El Dorado. So when in the late 1870s he heard the whisper on the wind of a new silver excitement in the Dos Cabezas Mountains, he left Tombstone and headed northeast. He was in a hurry. All prospectors are when they hear the siren call of a fresh strike, certain that unless they reach the ground at once, all the valuable claims will have been staked. Johnny took his bearings with his mind's eye on the shortest route and outfitted himself to meet his demands. It was midsummer. The temperature hovered around 110 up, and he figured he had about 70 miles to cross between water holes. He was strong and filled with confidence. He had a burro, lightly loaded, and with a minimum of his possessions. Besides his canteen, he had a water bag of his own invention. It was made of heavy canvas sides that allowed just enough evaporation to cool the dry significantly. No, cool the water slightly. He had devised it under studying the Mexican pottery always hanging in the shade of the roof sidewalks throughout the border towns. He calculated, starting fresh, he could cut across the Dragoons in one day, camp and rest on the shore of the dry lake, and when night came, push on directly across it. The lake was a waterless stretch, too hot to cover in the daytime. He would have detoured around it and headed north to pick up the Wilcox stage route, but he would save a whole day by going straight across the level bed, and it was easier walking as long as he didn't get lost. Out in the middle, there was no horizon except for the stretching white sand, but at night he could steer his course by the stars. Johnny made good time, occasionally glancing at Lion Peak off his left shoulder and trying to ignore the sun, his wide hat pulled down against the burning rays. He reached the last slope of the foothills above the lake and camped in the shade of a rock burst. If he slept until sundown, he would be able to cross the lake bed and reach the stage road on the north side, sometimes in the next afternoon. Then he would rest again, and the last leg of the new camp would be a cinch. He watered the burro, had his sparing drink, and shared his cold biscuits with the little animal. He did not picket it. Hundreds of miles to travel with him, the Jenny had never strayed more than a few yards from camp. He did pull off the paddle sack with his provisions and the precious bag of water so the burro could rest too. He beat the brush for snakes and dug his hip holes and wiggling into a comfortable position, and he went to sleep. He wakened by a scream. He lay for an instant, orienting himself to the sound, and grabbing his rifle from the ground at his side, came to his feet. He recognized the scream of a hunting cat, and he knew it was a burro that the beast would be after. in the dark, and he overslept. And this was the second reaction, that he would have been on his way long before now. His first concern was the journey. He could not see much, and he went forward cautiously, listening for further sounds. What he heard warned him that the cat had already made its kill, and his hands tightened down on the gun. But he never got to shoot. By the time he found the slaughtered burrow, the cat had torn what it wanted from the small body and vanished into the rocky hills. Johnny stood beside the mangled carcass, and a hard lump rose in his throat. He and the burrow had covered many strikes together, many lonely miles, and the little beast had never failed him. But sentiment was not enough to turn him aside, and to make him follow the killer's trail to take revenge. He had that other call he must answer. He turned back to camp, his eyes accustomed to the dark now, and stopped, staring in consternation. In its blind flight from the attacking cat, the burrow had blundered through the mound of supplies beside the empty pack saddle, scattering them beyond recovery. But it wasn't the burst flour sack or the end of bacon ground into the gritty soil that made Johnny groan. It was a water sack, laying flat and empty against the rocks, ripped open by the burrow's sharp hoof. Johnny had never needed profanity and wasted no time in cursing now. He picked up a side of bacon and half a dozen dried biscuits and wiped them on his sleeve. Then he tested his canteen. It was better than half full. Holding it, he looked across the dry lake, weighing his chances. The moon was up, and a silver sheet covered the enormous flatness, so wide that Johnny fancied he could see the curvature of the earth. The sensible thing would be to head back south and re-outfit and try again. But prospectors are gamblers. The lake lay cool and inviting, and without the lagging burrow, he should be able to walk 6 or 7 miles in an hour. Johnny hesitated only a moment, and then he took a small drink from the canteen by way of a toast to his fortune, and started out. The walk through the night was easy, and the moon gave him his direction, and the sand was hard packed under his boot. When the daylight came, the world was still as flat as the ocean around him. He could not see the low ridge of rocks that would tell him he was nearing the far shore. He could only go forward and hope to make it across before the sun would strike it down. It looked like a ball of fire rising out of the haze in the eastern sky, and as it rose, heat increased until the air waves rising from the sand tasted like the breath of a blast furnace. When it was overhead, John knew that all his years at the frontier he had never known such heat. His senses grew sluggish, and the hot haze that rose around him was like a curtain, hard to see through. He felt his body's tissues crawl as the moisture was sucked from him. His tongue was growing too large for his mouth. If only there was shade, just a little shade to relieve for a few moments of the monotonous heat of the sun. But there was none. The floor of the lake remained bare, and though it had been scraped by a blade. He stopped, anchoring his feet against their tendency to stumble, and sipped from his canteen. He had taken many sips in the last 5 hours, and the bottle was distressingly light. The sip only aggravated his thirst. He felt that he could drink sea water, and his body was drying up like jerked meat. He lurched on, and about 4 o'clock he swallowed the last of the water, almost boiling now, and heaved the useless canteen away. Peculiarly, the unburdening of the light vessel seemed to give him added strength. He straightened, and for a quarter of a mile he pushed forward at increased speed. If only he could last until sunset. Suddenly, he became aware of a set of tracks. He stared at them, and he mulled his mind, trying to focus on the unbelievable possibility there was another human being out in this vast emptiness, another man who might have water. Then, very slowly, his brain cleared the suspicion. He lifted his foot and placed it in the boot print ahead of him. The tracks were his own. He had been traveling in a circle, and he did not know for how long. In his daze, he must have forgot to check the position of the blazing globe above. Johnny sat down and cried from exhaustion and frustration, although there was no moisture left in him for tears. He continued to sit, not because he had given up, but because he had no idea where he was, which way to start again. Why walk when each step would probably take him deeper again into the waste? Better to wait in darkness where he could endure that long. Then the moon would at least give him points on the compass. So he sat in the merciless glare, trying to hold to the wavering senses. Then he saw a mirage. At first, it was only water, perhaps a wishful hallucination, blue water and waves flooding across the dead lake. Johnny struggled up, reaching forward instinctively, then dropped his hand, for he still had enough wits to recognize it for what it was. The image grew sharper, terrifyingly real. Johnny squeezed his eyes closed, and when he opened again, he saw the train. It was coming towards him at an angle. Every detail of the big chuffing engine and the two yellow-painted cars behind were sharply distinct as a lithograph. Smoke rolled from that fat stack and blew back across the water. Johnny had heard stories about the train ever since he had come into the country, but he had never seen it before. It moved steadily, deliberately through the waves without disturbing them, and he could see no rails. He watched it, fear sharpening his faded senses, making him forget the thirst. Then a rage broke in him. It was bad enough he was doomed to die here, but why must this vision appear to mock him? This was a real train, and if the water were real, he would be saved. He heard a whistle, the clang of a bell, and the whine of wheels on an uneven track. Hysteria washed away his rage. Johnny began to laugh, to jump up and down, and to wave his arms. Then he heard himself screaming, and he knew his mind was broken, and screamed at the top of his lungs, yet no sound came from his parched throat. The only sound was the steady throbbing of a coming train. He watched fascinated horror as it headed directly for the spot where he stood, looming larger and larger, the brass rim of the headlight glinting. The two big drivers, locked in their bars, spun monstrously. The sooted face of the engineer craned from the cab. Johnny's every fiber cried to him to run, to dive for safety before the heavy flanges crushed out the life remaining in him. And where he had stopped and stepped for a moment, now paralyzed and unable to move. At last the moment of the vision was refracted away. It would not grind him over, but it would pass within 4 or 5 feet. It did not pass. The roaring engine came abreast of Johnny, and the brake shoes screamed as they bit against the wheel rims. The couplings crashed together, and the train stopped. Like some puffing monster that stood, steam hissing from the engine and from the connectors between the cars. Johnny could almost have reached out and touched it, but he did not dare. Then the door at the end of the second car opened, and a blue-coated conductor swung down the high steps and stood beside him, calling out, "What? All aboard?" Johnny heard it clearly, but he could not move, and the voice rose in impatience. "Come on, we're already behind." The conductor pulled a turnip watch and read it. 15 minutes now, and we're supposed to make this stop. 15 minutes late now, and we weren't supposed to make the stop. He looked towards the engine and raised his hand in a highball sign. The whistle shrilled, and the driver began to turn, protesting. The conductor stalked forward, caught Johnny's arm, and wrenched him from the place where he was rooted, boosting him up the steps of the car platform, and the car jerked into motion. Johnny stumbled against a heavy door, without strength to open it. The conductor reached across him and swung it inward, and, supporting Johnny, shoved him through. The car was well full. There was a white blur of curious faces, acrid smells of coal smoke and tobacco. Then Johnny's vision reeled as the conductor steered him and pushed him down into a seat. Johnny did not think that he lost consciousness. He heard a murmur of sympathetic voices above him through the blacked-out haze, and he heard one man say, "Poor guy, he's had a real tough time. He's about done in." "Water," was the unintelligible word that came from Johnny's throat. "Water. Water." "Hey, he's coming around." There was astonishment in the tone. "Get a cup of water. Don't give him too much." Johnny opened his eyes, expecting to see the conductor and passengers in the car. Instead, he saw strangers, a window with words painted on it. Johnny closed his eyes and opened them again, not knowing what to believe. What was real? What was fantasy? But the water felt real as it crossed his cracked lips and swollen tongue. His body accepted it was real. Then he gave him only a little at first, although he begged for more. Then gave it to him in drops, allowing time for it to seep through his tissues. And finally, when he could frame the words, he asked where he was. They told him he was in the sheriff's office in Wilcox, and that the man named Markham had found him stumbling across in circles about 5 miles outside of town. They knew who he was. They asked where he had come from, and he told them about the burrow and crossing the lake, and about the train. They stood nodding, understanding. Thirst and the desert heat make for strange imaginings. He asked what day it was, and they told him. Johnny set his chin stubbornly. Markham had found him just after sundown, the day he had spent in the lake bed. It was impossible for him to walk to Wilcox between 4 and sundown, in the best of his condition. There were too many miles between. He said so, and repeated the story of the train picking him up. They told him he had his dates mixed. Johnny insisted. He knew that he had left Tombstone, and knew when he had entered the dry lake. And they told him the sun had done its work on him, and had addled his brain. But Johnny Cowden knew what he knew, and no argument would ever convince him he was wrong. He had seen the train, he had heard it, he had ridden it. He stuck to his story. Before he left the Wilcox Sheriff's Office, he had earned the name Crazy Johnny, and that followed him forever. He went off the rails. It's a crazy train. Ooh, we're on the last story. Yep, last story. Oh, the final story from this book. Ghost Wolf Thunder Mount by Will Henry. I had the story from the lips of the man who concerned most. Therefore, I am confident in relating it. This was in the Sangres County, when New Mexico was many legends younger than it is now. If I had the exact place of the ranch of Don Gaspar de Portugal on the Agua Prieta, certain anuncios would certainly precisely what family and what rancho were intended. Yet, of course, the actual names would still be protected today's pack of rascals and trespassers, that collective amoeba of man's curiosity which will seep into any place where the pale one has been before them. So call the rancho Agua Prieta and its master Don Gaspar, and call the great mountain which towers beyond the river and the grassy slopes and the juniper flats Trueno, because that is not its true name either, but very close to it. Ah, old ones, do I see you nod and smile? Certainly, yes. You know the perk I mean. The season was early winter. Upon my arrival, the Christmas festivities had barely begun. At the week's end, they had reached the carnival stage that we, the transplanted children of Coronado and Cabeza de Vaca, regard as just the proper excitement for the feast of the Christ child. I did not believe that the guest list was composed so far of travelers and affluents, such as myself. Nothing like that. Don Gaspar was the patron of the area in some states of the first American colonies. A good flock gathered at his elegant hacienda that was composed principally of those he called his children, and in turn the vast respect addressed him as el patron. These were the vaqueros who guarded the cattle, the pastores and zagalos who tended the sheep, the shopkeepers, blacksmiths, cooks, and the people of all degree who, with their broods of brown-eyed little ones, and, of course, their buxom white-toothed women, were the family of Don Gaspar and of the Agua Piedra. But this was not their story, except in a related way, as brothers are related, yet different. On the night of which I tell, the merrymaking had achieved such a riotous pitch the Americans mistakenly call a fandango, a wild dance without morals, leading to mayhem and to marital as well as martial strife. Well, it was true summer dancing, and many were dancing. Many were shouting on the dancers, and also the guitar and marimba players who lured the dancers to their gay gyrations. Add to this by one of the shrieks and laughters of children jousting to break the hanging clay baskets, so bright gifts which decorated the rafters of the Saya Grande, and the clapping yelps of encouragement from the older ones who had passed the time dancing in their lives. Well, Yep, that is one moment. Well, a fact must be granted. Something very like a fandango was going forward. But then, these children of my own blood were not mingled with any but their own kind that evening. Only smiles flashed, and no knives. Entering the cella, I searched at once for some less tumultuous haven. Presently I spied it, the far side of the room where a giant fireplace gave light and warmth to the eyes and bones of the oldsters clustered there. Their backs were hunched to the gaiety behind them, and they relieved their own bodies, far greater than this one. They complained that in the older days the children behaved themselves in much more decorous fashion, while the young men were far more mannerly, when the young women, por Dios, would not dream of showing anything like such a calf, an ankle, and, bear God, to witness, even a knee. Knowing the coterie from yesterday at the most compatible of a man for my own persuasions, and, yes, admit it, of my better Christmases gone by, I made my way round the crowded wall, and it reached the hearth and found my seat beside a grandly handsome octogenarian vaquero, or had he been indeed a caballero, and was loading my pipe when it happened. I'd never heard such a sound before, nor have I since. It was a long, quavering cadence of sorrow, indescribably mournful, and yet its burden came not into the room as sadness, but as naked fear. Down it came through the silver hoarfrost air of the December night, falling from the bleak granite ramparts of Otoño, Thunder Mountain, and spread into some chill in the other world, among the gay dancers in Don Gaspar's hacienda. The pause was but that of an instant. There was a nervous shuffling of feet, and coughing of throats, and here and there false tittering laughter. Some young men in bravado spoke aloud. One child began sobbing. The older people were universally silent. It was a very disturbing moment. It only passed because Don Gaspar alertedly orders the musicians to resume at once. They did this with an irresistible rendition of Jalisco, but the spell was not broken so swiftly that I had not time to note the particular action of the most grizzled of the graybeards by the fire. The old fellow had started eagerly, as the great wolf's sobbing cry had echoed down the mountain. He had remained in a tense attitude for listening, long after the final eerie note that quavered away in the distance, and long after it had been in the now returned rhythms of the marimba players. You have guessed already that the old fellow was one that I had been attracted to. He was of noble face and white locks to the shoulder. Beside him I had made my seat. Presently I addressed him softly. "Wolf calls you, senor. What does it say?" He looked sharply at me. He was certainly startled, but I also detected what might have been gratitude in the old eyes. "You jest, senor. Do not ridicule me." "But of course not. I sympathize. I am in accord. I would hear what you have to say to tell me. I would hear what you may have to tell me." He nodded and returned to what I thought was his endless gazing into the embers of the fire, but I had not lost him, nor he his memories. "I was young once," he said, "even as they who click the heel and stamp the boot where there is music sounds. Rich I was in land and sheep and cattle. For wife I had one of great beauty and God-given graces. The good Christ had seen fit as well to bless us with a beautiful son. The sea-hole belonged our total lives. It was a light which lit the pathways of our existence. Do you understand?" "But of course," I bowed. "Please continue." "Almost daily was his son my company, from the first birthday onward. Always he guarded the extreme caution lest harm befall him. You see, it had befallen that in his birth some damage was done. My wife could bear no other child. Thus in the boy we dwelled a degree not healthy. Eventually such bondage as we forced upon the little boy had become unbearable to him. He longed just once to wander forth without the guard of the vaqueros which followed me, as I followed him. "Please, Padre," he would beg of me, "por favor, only this one time allow me to see the land by myself. There's something out there which seems to call to me, and I want to go and find out what it is. The old man paused, shaking his silvered head. You will recognize this as strange talk coming from a little boy of only a few summers' age, but I was not old and wise then, and I answered the lad impetuously, without good reason, told him no. The springtime softened into summer, and those brief golden days of August came and went like heat lightning, and like our youth, splendid and exciting, yet also strangely muffled, oh, so very swift and soon gone. And after that came the autumn, and the red leaves and yellow on the slopes and in the river bottoms. Soon the first fall of snow lay on the shoulders of El Terreno, mantling the palisades to the first flats and benches of the valleys. One day toward fall, in the evening, my little son was not to be found. It was full of starlight when we discovered upon one of the highest flats amid the juniper and greasewoods his small tracks, dim and lonely, leading off through the thin snowfile up the north slope of El Terreno. As my vaquero set off urgently pursuing his faint trail, slowed of course by the darkness and by the treacherous footing of their horses, a penetrating scream of a panther was heard above us, and in the direction of those tiny footprints led. And more, even as my men and I exchanged fearful glances at this first dread sound, it was overlaid by a second cry, far more compelling than that of the panther. It was El Grito del Lobo, the marrow-freezing hunger cry of the great gray timber wolf. Esteban Chavez, my mayordomo, looked at me. Esteban Chavez, my mayordomo, looked at me. El Lobo Ama, he said. I'm afraid. I think he calls us. Lead on, Esteban, I replied. He gave me a sorrowing glance, and then the men did the same, but they put spurs to mounts and went up the icy slope because they loved me and my small son. We came to a very dangerous switchback in the trail, then a topping-out place, studded with boulders and scrub-like pines. There before our eyes lay the signs of disaster. The broad paw of the panther showed in the snow, joining the track of my son. Chavez knew this particular panther. It had had two central toes on the left forefoot cut from one of our traps. Chavez and the men called this great cat La Sombra, the shadow. The story told by the Campos of our sheep and cattle herdsmen was this animal was a female bigger than any male, and more, that she was not pure mountain blood, such as the panthers we knew and called pumas. Instead, she had for the sire some wandering Mexican jaguar male, appeared in the sunburst, God knows how, on a wanderlust of hunger. This La Sombra, then, was not as the other pumas, which would not harm man, not even his children or his woman. She was a killer of men, and had murdered 3 of my own pastores, 2 of them only young boys. Again the old man paused, his memory reaching back a dim track of time. I came as one possessed, he resumed. I threw out caution to the freezing winds and raced after the difficult trail. Suddenly a final spark of my hope was plunged out, as before my eyes a third track joined the previous 2. I stared down in disbelief as the great splay-footed mark of El Lobo. We called him only that, El Lobo, the wolf, and we said it that way, marking a line under the "the" with our tongue. All knew which that meant. El Lobo, the most dreaded animal in New Mexico. Some said even that he had been feared in Oñate and Diaz and Puerto Olivero road here. All in this new Some said that he had been feared when Oñate and Diaz, Pedro Olivero rode here, calling all this land near Spain. Some still say this. You saw their faces but a breath ago, when the great cries sobbed down from the mountain, eh? Si, Anisito, I nodded. I saw them. Pray continue. As you will, senor. I stood but a moment hypnotized by the mark of the huge foot in the snow. Then I raced on as before, caring not for La Sombra or El Lobo, or for God or Christ, or even the Holy Ghost, even, but only for my son. I was in my mind I was in my own mind to become greater than my savior. There was no place for the Prince of Peace. This was a time for the Avenger, and I was that alone. My rifle was ready, my knife and my pistol too. With my bare hands I would have attacked either beast, or both. Hope was dead, but revenge was mine. In my madness I forged far ahead of my followers, in this manner coming first upon the tragedy. The way that the panther's tracks read in the snow, I knew that I stood behind the very boulder from which the bestial cat had hurled herself upon my son. I lunged beyond that fatal rock, dreading to have my worst fears confirmed, yet insane with vengeance. Senor, you will be hard-pressed to accept it. Rounding that great stone, I fell headlong over a huddled mass, measuring my length on the trail beyond. Sitting up, I beheld the monster carcass of El Sombra, rigid in that death for which her was but an experience she had meted out to countless pitiful others. Her enormous whiskered head was thrown aside, lay at a gruesome angle, the white throat ruffed crimson. The white throat ruffed was dyed crimson, throat itself ripped from ear base to ear base. "The Lobo?" I objected quietly. "The same, senor. One fearsome strike, he had smashed her down as lightning rivers mighty pine. But why, senor? This is what Esteban Chavez and my men were staring at the black night and muttering they crossed themselves. We searched the mountainside for any sign of my son. Nothing was discovered until, hidden in a sheltered bottom of a small canada, you know, senor, a little cleft or rift in the mountain's flank, we found a thing which sets the short hairs at the nape of my neck to bristling. There in the starlight were the marks of a lobo's great splayed paws with the tiny footprints of my lost son, moving along side by side. And that is the way those tracks disappeared in the darkness, down the mountain's wild, desolate slope." I let the old man pause to think of his thoughts. I did not dare to break the slender thread which was leading him back through the years. Presently he sighed deeply and returned to those misty times. "Long and weary was it trailing through the night," he said. "My men were several times at the edge of exhaustion, at the rebels' point of turning back. But as they led the boy, we staggered on, our horses now behind us, led by their bridles, the way too steep and treacherous for them to bear us. Dawn found us at our trail's end, and yes, I see that you have guessed it. The trail brought up sharply at the very door of my own hacienda. From that place, the giant tracks of the wolf faded back into the fastness of El Sereno. Frantically I rushed into my house, only to be met in silence by my servants and my woman, who inform me that the boy has been snugly in his bed, sleeping these 3 hours." The old man frowned, moving his head uncertainly. "The boy had simply come out of the blackest part of the dawn, saying he was tired, and wanted to go to his bed. He seemed in no way disturbed by his harrowing experience. The following day, however, we noted an odd reluctance on his part to discuss, in any way, the adventure. He had been with the wolf, we could determine. He made several references to the big gray dog, and we found upon his garments a great quantity of the black-tipped, silver-guard hairs of the timber wolf. Indeed, it was as though the great brute and my son had lain down together to rest upon the trail at some points during the remarkable journey. Some time later, the boy's behavior became more marked by its strangeness. We called in a priest, and he could gain no more from my son than we could, his parents and protectors. I've never since that day been to the child of Mother Church that I once was. It seemed to me that here we were dealing with some very different work of Lucifer, that the bumbling padre could achieve no more than a thumb of beads and implore the saints to send a sign by which he might know his way in the matter. But what good is a god who will not better instruct his minions than that? Had I such a mozo, peon, vaquero, I would discharge him, or at least restrict his supplies of chiles and frijoles. Well, I've wandered, excuse me." "There's nothing," I assured him. "All these thoughts will pass through the mind and the remembering. I agree with you about priests. They eat too well. And you know, I'm one of faith, and I don't trust the Padres. I've known the sort you speak of. They ought to have had the cart drivers or coal burners, and again, Rosteros or donkey women. This pleased him fleetingly. Yes, they know more about the brute souls than of a human soul. In any event, the boy became more and more peculiar. He was to be found from time to time in the extreme cold on the patio. Winter was upon us now, clad only in his nightclothes, gazing away toward the mountain, his face lacking any mortal animation. When I questioned him somewhat sternly about these midnight forays, he only replied softly, "He's calling me, father. Can you not hear him upon the mountain?" "Who is calling?" I demanded sharply, and he answered, still looking away. "El lobo de lor, the lobo de Yora, padre, the wolf that cries." It's hopeless and very frightening. Each night the chill wail would come sobbing down from the heights of El Trenio. Sometimes the others of us could not hear it, and sometimes we could not. Sometimes the others of us could hear it, sometimes we could not. But the boy heard it, always. We attempted every device. Other priests were sent to from afar, even a bishop from Kahula. Doctors were brought in from Santa Fe, and even Las Cruces. What use? They charged us much money and left the boy no better. I've since felt that doctors are about as I do padres. They should all have been carpenters, like the Father of Jesus. This was his last pause. Now, one sensed it. Well, Senor, you have been patient. It was on an eternally damned night, brief weeks later, that my son disappeared for the final time. This time he did not leave alone. Leading from the door of my hacienda, clearly imprinted on the new fallen snow, side by side were the small marks of my son's tiny feet, the great pad marks of the wolf. We searched the mountain again, the whole night through, but you know the end already of the story. We did not find the boy, we did not find the wolf. The trail faded into nothingness on the upper slopes of Thunder Mountain. The night was clear, the starlight blazing bright at this great height, yet the tracks disappeared as if into the still night air. Nor did we ever find my son, senor. Stores were there, continued to be. Small frozen bodies found, tiny human skeletons revealed by the summer thaw on High Mountain. But always no real proof. Always the body and the bones were gone when my riders and I came up, or were then been seen. After a certain time, my proud spirit died. My mind wandered, and my riches with it. Even my name was forgotten. It is still forgotten. These happy ones in this room do not remember me, only my story. It does as well. Do you know what night it was upon which the boy last left me? The night we found the wolf tracks leading him away from the door beyond the dancers there. It was on the same night as his present one, senor. The same night in this very hacienda, then mine, that it happened. Do you wonder now that I start up when El Lobo calls upon the mountain? Do you wonder that I hold my hand to the ear, listening to hear if it is my name he calls at last? Well, senor, time of waiting is done. The night I heard my name, I am content, my friend. Already it grows over long since I've seen my little son, and it will be a glad meeting on the far mountains. Remember that. Let there be no sadness now when the wolf is called again. I started to say something to him, as his words trailed off, but my own words never left my lips. A log dislodged in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. The noise of the rivers grew unaccountably quiet. I shut myself off to ward off a sensation of creeping cold, with a frosty draught of air. I even looked to see if some overheated dancers had not opened the great oaken doors of the hacienda. They had not. Yet suddenly the merrymakers froze in their position. The popping embers echoed in the stillness. From high above, an eerily beautiful wolf house sounded on Thunder Mountain. The first notes of the call, the old man by my side glanced upward in the direction of El Toraño. But as the final strains sobbed from the heights, he was no longer looking at the mountain. He was leaning back with a gentle smile of peace, and I realized the gallant soul had fled. There remained, however, one element of the departure which puzzled me. It was a thing I had to make sure of my own mind, for the sake of my own peace. I went quickly to the oaken door of the hacienda, when no one was watching. I opened it and stepped outside. The new snow was falling. It lay about the ranch yard as innocent as disturbance, except for singular distinct impressions upon a starlit surface. From the hacienda's doorway, stretching away into the winter darkness, waiting midnight shadows of El Treno, lay 3 sets of footprints. One of those of a very old man, one of those of a young lad, and one of those of a larger American timber wolf than I have ever seen. Even as I stared at those ghostly footprints, the 3 companions, their track marks were beginning to fade beneath the increasing snowfall. When I returned to the big room of the hacienda, and was told the old man had indeed passed on, I went again to the open door and looked out into the night. The tracks were gone. The snow beyond the ancient doorstep lay clean of any mark. I never repeated the story, then or since. Yay! Ghost Wolf! Well, now that we have gotten the last ghost story of the great ghost stories of the Old West, we should probably find some to read. I do hear someone reading Dracula, if anyone might be so inclined. So do we want Dracula? Let's see who else is on. I don't know if I'll read. So, Dracula, what do we say? Yeah, let's go into Dracula. And of course, tomorrow will be fairy tales. So, I hope you all have a wonderful night. And if you hear a wolf howling out in the darkness, it's not necessarily a bad thing. This would kind of classify it as banshee. Oh well. Night, everyone.